Today we're going to be talking about several things. We're going to start with record screen enhancements. We've made enhancements to the fund screen, the constituent screen, the grant screen, etc. We'll be talking about some of those record level changes. Grants can now be encumbered using journal entries. For a while, for you guys in your current production versions, you can only encumber grants through invoices, and we've added a new option to use journal entries instead. We'll talk about that. We have made some enhancements to the query screen. We've added some new field elements, some new data elements. We've also fixed a few issues on the query screen. We'll talk about those. The Spectrum new user registration function, and then also on the back end for your foundation staff, the GE portal processing queue. We've made enhancements to both of those, to both how the users register online and then how your staff can handle those registration requests that come in. So we'll talk about some of those enhancements. We've added a few new features to the Spectrum donor portal. We have added some enhancements to the Spectrum applicant portal as well. Let's talk about those. We've made some significant enhancements to configuring, managing, and processing web applications. Specifically, one of the things that we're going to talk about is the ability to have supplemental pages in Spectrum, driven not just by proposal workflow or scholarship application workflow, but also by grant workflow. And so we'll be talking about that as well. And then we've made dozens of small enhancements and issue fixes. Again, we don't have time to cover all these in this meeting. We'll publish a full list of them online. But we'll be able to hit a couple of those highlights on today's meeting. So let's talk about the record screen enhancements. The first one is that we've added active flags to funds. In your CRM and finance systems, Raiser's Edge, Financial Edge, et cetera, you can flag a fund or a project as being inactive. For the longest time, GE hasn't known about that. So our sync function now brings in that active flag to say whether or not a fund is active in the CRM system, whether or not it's active in the finance system. And if a fund is inactive in either one of those systems, you can still see the full grant history, the full fund history, but you cannot create new grants for that fund, for example. You can't create new proposals that are funded to that fund, et cetera. So we've added that active flag to the fund record. Use of the grants address type in the CRM and finance systems is now optional. Most, if not all of you, have a grants address type configured in Raiser's Edge or in eCRM. And also, we work with the grants address description in the Financial Edge as well. If you remember way back when, the SIG group was very adamant that when GE changes a record in the Raiser's Edge, we don't mess with the system of record, right? We don't mess with the primary address. However, there are a couple of foundations that have asked that we not do a grants address, that instead we work with the preferred address. So out of the box, if you upgrade to this new version, your system will continue to work the way it does, but there's a global setting you can turn on that will allow you to have GE not work with the grants address type, but instead to update the preferred address instead. The constituent screen, we have now added a funds tab. It's only visible for fund advisors, for donors. We've had several foundations say that when they pull up an advisor record in GE, they want to quickly see a list of the funds that they have relationships to. And so we've got that read-only now in GE. This one may not affect many of you, but this is that editing of constituent contacts is now allowed for the foundations without a CRM system. Most of you have Raiser's Edge or eCRM as your CRM system. We have a few foundations who don't have either. And if you don't have a CRM system linked, then we give you a license key that allows you to create constituent records and fund records using GE. And for those foundations who can edit their constituents, the Constituent Contacts tab is now editable. It was read-only for a while, but that's been resolved. It's now editable. We've added a new user permission for unlock grant editing. If you remember on the grant screen, there's that unlock button that allows you to open up a grant record that is read-only and make changes to it. Before, that permission was based on, that functionality was based on a user permission called override grant status. We had a few foundations who said they want to allow their users to unlock a grant and edit it, but they don't want to allow their users to change the status of a grant. And so we broke this out into its own user permission so you can have more granular control over what your users can and can't do on the grant screen. The info tab on the record screens was causing a lot of problems with performance. The info tab has a list of associated records. So you pull up a grant record, for example, and you can see the fund, you can see the constituent, you can see the web application, et cetera. So you can see all the associated records. For a few foundations, if they pull up a constituent screen, and that constituent has a fund advisor relationship to all their funds, and they have 1,500 funds, well, the grant screen, the constituent screen had to load all 1,500 records into it before it would even show you the screen. So there were some serious performance issues for some foundations. And so we've locked it down now where we only load the first 10 associated record links by default, and that just speeds things up. You can click on a link and retrieve the entire list. But we're just loading the first 10 by default for performance reasons, and that's going to provide some relief for folks who have issues opening some constituent records. With a similar problem, we have a new global setting for including web applications in these associated records list. For some foundations who have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of web applications, then opening a grant record that is linked to a proposal that is linked to a web application means that you have to pull back on that profile tab. You have to pull back the profile details for the web application. And if you have a whole lot of data, then that was performing very poorly. So for those foundations who don't want to see web applications in their associated records lists just to improve performance, they can now turn that off if they like. And then finally here, the designated grants info tab now has an associated record listed for parent grant requests. This is another issue, another new feature we'll talk about in a moment here. But grant requests, grant recommendations that are made online by your donors in Spectrum can now be made as recurring payments, open-ended. I want to give $1,000 a month for, in perpetuity. And when those come in, they're not processed as grants, they're processed as designated grants. We'll talk about that in a second. But we've added that associated record link for the parent grant request on the designated grant record. So these are the grant screen enhancements. The record screen enhancements that we've made in this latest version of GE. We're going to jump now into encumbered grants. And so encumbrance batches, if you'll notice back up here, the encumbrance batch didn't have the status column before. It does have a status column now, and it's dynamically generated based on what's in the batch. But an encumbrance batch can be pending, it can be encumbered, it can be partially encumbered if some of the records could have been processed and others weren't processed successfully, and then it can be completed once the encumbrance is finished. So we now have that status column. And then the big new feature that I mentioned earlier was this concept of encumbrance batches now being processed via journal entries. So on the screen, you still have the option to encumber your grants via invoices if you still want to use that function. We haven't taken that away. But on any given encumbrance batch, you have to choose whether you want the grants on that batch to be encumbered via journal entry or via invoice. The way it works on journal entries is that when we process this encumbrance, we immediately make a journal entry in the finance system for the full amount of the grant. And then as you make the payments, we partially reverse that encumbrance with an additional journal entry with negative numbers in the amount of the payment. And so if you have a $4,000 grant to be paid over 4 years, $1,000 a year, then every year we'll go in and take $1,000 off of that encumbrance. We also handle adjustments, of course. So if you have to process a refund or if you have to void and cancel a payment, et cetera, then we make journal entries to cover those things as well. So you now have a new option on how to encumber your grants if you choose to do encumbered grants rather than just traditional invoicing grants. Let's move into the query enhancements. The query screen had a few issues that we resolved, and it's got some new functionality as well. So we've got new tables and fields for reviews and for designated grants. I'll real quickly show you how these work. This is a web application review summary, and you get one record here per web application. So if I have 5 reviews, I'm only going to see one record here. I'll see the number of reviews, the average score, the yes/no recommendations in a comma-separated list, etc. If I want to query, all 5 of my reviews as 5 separate records, I can join to this view that has the details of each individual review. So we've got new review fields in the query screen. We have designated grants as a whole new. We have designated grants as a whole new area in the query enhancements. Designated grants are here. Designated recipients we've got, and then also the designated grant history is all shown here. We've got another one. I didn't have time to add it to this PowerPoint presentation, but the California Community Foundation submitted a query to us. Said, hey, we think this may be useful for you going forward. Here's a query that you guys might want to put into your query screen. And essentially it is grant recipient contact emails that are specific to a grant. So we'll be adding that in as well. But if anyone at your foundation is sharp with SQL and you get a SQL query that you think may be useful to add to the query screen, feel free to submit it to us. We'll be happy to take a look and add it if it seems appropriate. So thank you to the California Community Foundation for submitting that SQL. We'll be adding it in this version. We also fixed a couple of issues in the query screen. That last tab of the query screen that shows the results. When a query was opened read-only, then the export link, the print link, et cetera, those were all disabled. And so now they are enabled, and you can export, you can create a report, you can print, et cetera, even if you've opened up the query read-only. And then there was also a similar issue where you couldn't double-click and open on the results grid. If you double-click on a recipient row, on a constituent row, you couldn't open up the constituent screen. Double-clicking on a grant screen, you couldn't open up the grant screen, et cetera. So that has been resolved, and we've also added functionality to open up web applications and constituent records as well. So when you double-click on those results, you can open up those record screens now. So that's an enhancement that was asked for by a couple of foundations too.
Hey Jeff, it's Ann.
Yes.
Someone
Hi, Ann.
has a question. Someone has a question. Their question is comments for review queries. Not sure what that means.
Comments for review queries. Oh, the comments field, they probably got cut off here, but I'm sure comments is part of this as well. So we've got the total score, the weighted score, the effective score, et cetera. The comments are going to be down here as well on the web application reviews.
Oh, okay. Yep, they want to know if they can export them. Okay.
Yep, quite right. No problem. For future reference, let's save the questions to the very end so we can get through the PowerPoint here, and we'll do a full question and answer session there at the end. But let's talk here real quickly about the registration and the portal processing queue. We have improved the portal registration process when an email address is found in GE. If someone comes in to register as an applicant, occasionally they will find their email address already in the grants database. And the Spectrum user experience wasn't great before. We've made that a better experience. We prompt them, is this your email address, et cetera. So we've improved that. I'm going to jump here. One of the other issues that we found with that registration process was that occasionally, this happened with a couple of foundations, but occasionally an applicant would register as a grant applicant. And instead of being linked to, instead of coming in as an individual constituent, they would actually get registered and linked to the organization record. And every Spectrum user should be linked to an individual constituent, not to an organization constituent. So we have added a new feature. If you see this last item on this PowerPoint here, we've added a new feature to the portal processing queue to create a new GE constituent for the web user. So if you get someone who is registered and the portal has already linked them to the constituent record for the org, you can create a new constituent record just by clicking a button. It'll create a new constituent record for the individual. It will link their web user to that individual, and it will disassociate them from the org on the web user side, and then it will let you set up that link to the org properly through the portal processing queue. During that portal processing registration, we've added some tax ID help for user registration. A couple of foundations told us that their registrants were confused on what the tax ID was. We've provided some text there that says For individuals, it's a social. For orgs, it's an EIN in the United States. So we got that in.
Can I interrupt you?
In the portal processing queue, we've also resolved a couple of issues related to the way that we create RE constituent records. Occasionally, there was an issue with creating org records. You could create the individual record, no problem, but when you went to create the org record, sometimes it wouldn't work properly. So you can click a button and automatically create that RE constituent record, both for the individual and for the organization, and it creates the correct constituent type in Razor's Edge every time now. And that same change has been made for ECRM as well. Another enhancement that we've made here, this last one, is that emails sent from the portal processing queue can now be based on constituent correspondence templates. You're prompted in the portal processing queue, would you like to send an email to this individual, notifying them of your processing of their request? And it brought up a completely blank email. So you can now do a mail merge. You can choose one of your constituent correspondence templates and do a mail merge right there on the spot into your email. And then you can edit that before you send it. So that's something that a couple of folks have asked for. So we've made some enhancements to the donor portal as well. As I mentioned before, recurring grant recommendations are now supported. So if you see this red box, a donor can request, and this is a feature you can turn on or off, by the way. If you don't want this, you don't have to take advantage of it. But a donor can now request a recurring payment. You'll notice that the number of payments field is not shown here. Once you check that box, it hides the number of payments field so that they can't enter that, because that would be confusing. So we did this for a foundation that's a religious organization, not a community foundation, whose members want the ability to have recurring gifts, maybe tithes, that sort of thing, right? And their users can now request these recurring payments. In the back end, when you go to your online grant requests screen, typically you process these grant requests to become grant records in GE. And instead of becoming grant records, if they've chosen recurring payment, the online grant request screen in GE will instead create a designated grant record that you can then use for your recurring payments. So that's a feature that was paid for by a foundation and that all folks can take advantage of now. We made a couple of other security-related changes to the donor portal around funds. If we just take a quick step back, there are two different types of fund users in the donor portal. There's a fund associate who has a relationship to a fund but can't advise on that fund. So that's essentially a read-only user. And then we also have folks that have relationships that are configured with a relationship type to say that they are an advisor. An advisor can make donor-advised grant recommendations, and an associate cannot. So we have we've standardized that across the entire donor portal, where fund associates now have completely read-only access, and fund advisors can do all the things that the donor portal allows, creating new grant recommendations, et cetera. And so that impacted our drop-down lists of funds. So I may have a relationship to 10 funds, but I may only be an advisor on 7 of those 10. So when I go to the grant recommendation screen, I should only be able to make a grant recommendation from 7 of those 10 funds. And so those advisor lists are now filtered when that's appropriate. Right? So those are the security changes we made to the donor portal. Let's move on to web applications. These next 4 or 5 slides, these are the last few slides in this presentation, and they're all about changes that we've made to the web applicant experience online and related to the web application configuration experience by your staff. First of all, supplemental pages can now be driven by grant workflow. I know a lot of you have been asking for this for a while. But if you look at the screen here, this is the app config screen. Web apps config screen. This grid used to have a whole lot of fields. It was relatively complicated to administer. We've removed most of the columns on this grid and taken them out and put them onto a whole separate screen. So this pop-up screen here for the profile application page, this is a scholarship web application, and this lets you choose whether you're going to use scholarship workflow or grant workflow. And then you choose your task and your prerequisite task. Whoever Your prerequisite task does not have to be configured as a prerequisite task in your template. That's a change that several folks have asked for. Today in your systems, it does have to be configured that way in your template, but that's no longer the case. You don't have to have a prerequisite configured there. You can just configure it here for that prerequisite. And then the other change we've made on this drop-down list of page types, we've added support for up to 10 supplemental pages. We had a couple of foundations say that for their scholarship applications, they required 2 supplemental pages per year, right? One at the end of every semester asking for transcripts. And for a 4-year scholarship application, that would be at least 8 supplementals. So we've added support for up to 10 supplemental pages now. So that's the first chunk of changes for the web applications. Let's look at this next page here. This has to do with file attachments. So you have been able to add file attachments through GE. This was very useful for Offer users, but for Spectrum users, it wasn't too terribly useful at all because in Spectrum, an attachment is linked to a specific profile detail. It's linked to a specific question. And now you can add your file attachments from GE and link them to profile details. So we've pulled up a proposal web application here. This is the edit screen for that web application. You can see that there's a file attachment here. I can click on it and open it from here. I can delete it from here. When there's nothing in here, it'll give me a link to click that says select a file to upload, and I'll upload a particular file and add it directly to this application. So this is useful not only for adding an attachment for an applicant, this is also useful for adding an attachment for a reviewer. If you want to add something that the reviewer can take a look at, you can put it into a review-only question. And so this is something folks have been asking for a while. We have finally added that. And then it's also worth noting this screen allows you to both create and edit web applications directly in GE. When you create a web application, it saves it as submitted. But when you're editing an existing web application, it no longer changes the application status. It leaves the application status alone. There was an issue before where if you opened up a created application and made changes to it and saved it, it would automatically submit it. And that's no longer the case. We've resolved that issue too. We have added a few new functions for batch functionality. The first one is to expire web applications in batch. You can expire applications today by locking a scoring round, but that is really only relevant to cyclical web applications. If you have open-ended web applications, you really have no way of expiring old applications. And folks are saying that they've got applications sitting out there from 3 or 4 years ago that they haven't, they don't have a way to expire them. So now you can expire them in batch. And we've added a new archive function as well. And this was done for performance reasons. We've got some foundations who just have an astronomical amount of data in their profile values table. The profile values table is just notoriously slow for bringing back data if you have millions of records there. So for applications that you want to archive, you can take the data out of the profile values table and put it, by archiving it, we just, behind the scenes, we put it into a new archive table. And we do the same with the file attachments as well. And this just improves the performance of both the web portal and GE. And our functions that retrieve the data when you open up a record know to look in the archive table if it's appropriate. So you shouldn't see any change in the user experience, but archiving applications will essentially just make things work a whole lot faster. This new archive function is available for folks who are having performance issues in their web applications. And then finally, we resolved a longstanding issue where processing a web application to a proposal did not bring in a workflow template. It worked for scholarships, it didn't work for proposals. And so now whenever you create a proposal from a web application, it loads that default workflow template into it so that you have a workflow template to begin with and you don't have to manually go at that. We've made a couple of changes to the applicant experience online. For one thing, now we can tell when a file attachment attempt has failed for whatever reason. If there are web issues, if there are database issues, if a system is down, if something went wrong, something went awry, we can now inform the user that, hey, we were unable to verify your file attachment. Please, delete it and try again. So we can at least check for that now. So applicants would be aware that they need to delete it and try again. Someone asked if we would lock down the ability for applicants to submit files without an extension. We were having folks upload attachments that didn't have a file extension at all, and we have now blocked that. And then as you can see here, we've got better highlighting of the current application page. It doesn't have to be green. If your site has been customized with a different color, a different look and feel, we can go in and modify your CSS to have it look slightly different, but we have a different look for the currently active page that we can, it'll be more clear to an applicant and of course to a reviewer what the current page is on an application. One last page of changes here on web applications. We have added support inspection for pages with no fields. We've had some foundations that put an application online and they want page one should just be instructions. Or the last page before you submit should just be additional instructions, etc. So we were able to do it before with some trickery and JavaScript and HTML, and it was a bit ugly. But now you guys can do it yourselves. It's a whole lot easier. You don't have to know HTML to make that happen. So we can do this both for applicant instructions and also for reviewer instructions. Secondly, profile details. We now have a new hidden HTML field type. You can add fields to your application. When you choose when you configure your profile details, you choose what the field type is, whether it's going to be a file attachment or long text or numeric, date, etc. You can now choose a hidden field type, and that would be useful if you wanted to, put in a default value that everything coming in from this application is going to have a value of, X for whatever this field is. Or you can map in a field if you want a mapped field for your hidden HTML field. So that's now an option. It just gives you a bit more flexibility to do some more complex things in your applications. When GE and Spectrum create the HTML for your applications online, the elements are sort of a long, complicated element name, and one of the elements in that file name was the page type. This was causing a lot of problems for folks. If you go in and you take a standard page and you change it to preliminary, well, all of a sudden all of your HTML breaks. That's no longer going to be a problem because we are now ignoring the page type that gets generated. We're not generating the new page type going forward, and if you have element names that have a page type, we're completely ignoring them. So this should greatly reduce some errors that foundations have been experiencing as they're trying to set up their applications. So hopefully that'll be helpful. This next one here is that when you configure a web application to have a default scholarship fund, we now set that default scholarship fund whenever we create the web application. In the systems you have today, that gets set when the application is submitted. But for reporting reasons, there were a few foundations that wanted that set earlier. And so we're now setting that as the application is created, not as it's being submitted. And then one last item here. We have added cleanup and support of Unicode text. I know that's a technical term. My apologies. But we had some applicants who would copy and paste information from from a PDF document and paste it into an essay question. And some of those goofy characters from a PDF file would cause problems in the grants database. And so we've added some support for Unicode text as it comes in. We've added some cleanup functions as well to get rid of some of those goofy characters. But we now support the text that gets pasted in from PDFs. So at a high level, that's an overview of these changes that have come in. Again, this is not all of the changes that we've made to this release. We'll publish a full detailed list of not only what we changed, but which foundation recommended that change, so that you guys get credit for posting your feature requests or your bugs to us. And we're going to real quickly talk about the release schedule. Internally, we're testing our alpha version right now. I know we have found a couple of issues already in testing this week. We're going to be rebuilding this week. So we're still testing, ironing out all the kinks in GE 4.7 and Spectrum 1.11. Hopefully, we'll be releasing our beta by the end of this month. And I don't see a problem with that date. I'm pretty sure we're definitely going to hit that. So by the end of the month, we'll have beta ready. and we need beta testers. So if you want to be a beta tester, it's incredibly helpful if you have a test environment. If you're Blackbaud hosted, you're really not going to be able to be a beta tester. But if you're not Blackbaud hosted and you've got a test environment, we'd love to have you get an early copy of it and check it out and give us feedback. So if you're interested, please send me an email. I'll be more than happy to add you to our list of beta testers. So we're going to release on Halloween, barring any unforeseen issues. We should be ready to release production within a couple of weeks. So mid-November is when we're looking at our production-ready release from Fusion. At that point, we'll put a new patch for GE on Zendesk and SharePoint for those of you who host your own applications, and you can feel free to download that and upgrade yourselves. We'll send out an email notification once that happens. So if you're on the Zendesk distribution list, you should get an email notifying you that the new GE patch is out there. If you want to upgrade Spectrum, you need to contact us to open the Zendesk case to request an upgrade. I think we may only have one client that does their own, one or two clients that do their own Spectrum upgrades. Most of you guys have us do those with you. We're more than happy to help you upgrade Spectrum. So if you need that help, please open the case. We'll be happy to help you with it. If we host your Granite GE system here at Fusion Labs, please contact support or open a Zendesk case to request a GE upgrade. If you're hosted in Blackbaud, they've got a policy where once we release it into production, Blackbaud needs to see it stable in production for 4 weeks before they're willing to put it into their environment. So if we go live by mid-November, then Blackbaud hosting should be ready by mid-December for an upgrade. We realize that's the busy time of year for most of you guys, with your charitable giving really spiking at the end of the year. So we may ask Blackbaud to push back and not upgrade until the first week of January. So please give me feedback and let me know whether you think that we ought to upgrade as soon as possible or whether we ought to wait till January. I'll be happy to entertain all thoughts, and we'll pass those on to Blackbaud once we do this release. So that's it for the main portion of this presentation. I've unmuted all your lines, and so the lines should now be open. We've got about 15, 16 minutes here for question and answer. And I see a lot of questions that have come in through the chat. So I'm going to scroll up to the top and start. So I see a question here on the grant recommendation page. There are boxes for title, phone, and email. Where do these come in on the GE side? On the grant recommendation page, title, phone, and email. These come into the GE side when we are processing the grant recommendation, whenever we are updating the constituent record for the recipient, I believe. I'd have to take a look at that and see. I'm going to copy these questions and get back to you guys. So if you could tell me who is viewer 41, who submitted that one, if you don't mind letting me know who you are, just send me your name and your email address real quick in the chat. I'll be happy to respond to that one once I've had a chance to look it up.
Sure thing.
Is there a way for us to edit these error messages so they can be more helpful? Not sure which error messages you're referring to. Generally speaking, the error messages are built into GE. They're essentially hard-coded. If an error message is poorly worded, please let us know and give us better content, and we would be more than happy to change the verbiage of an error message in an upcoming release. But generally speaking, we can't edit error messages. There may be a couple of exceptions to that, but for the most part, no. So that's that one. Someone asks, the donor portal page is not the same part as the BB&C one. That's correct. So just to be clear, the BB&C Blackbaud Net Community for Foundations has what they call the foundation portal parts. And you can use grant parts in Net Community. They have part of the foundation portal parts is a donor portal. This is a completely separate product. This is our Spectrum web portal, which essentially is a replacement for the foundation portal parts and Proffer. If you take everything that the foundation portal parts do, everything that Proffer does, you can replace those and a lot more functionality with the Spectrum web portal. It's a completely different product. And if you're interested in seeing a demo of that product, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to set that up. The workflow type only allowed you to pick scholarship or grant. What about proposal? Oh, great question. Let me jump back to that screenshot. Someone says the workflow type only allowed you to pick scholarship or grant. What about proposal? I'm going to jump back in the PowerPoint. Here we are. So for the profile application, this pop-up screen, it only gave you the choice between scholarship and grant. That's because we're looking at a scholarship web application. If we were looking at a proposal web application, then this would say grant and proposal, and you would choose your proposal tasks if you had selected proposal here. So you do have either grant or scholarship for a scholarship, and you've got grant or proposal for proposal. So that's the way that screen works. Okay. Thank you for the 10 supplemental pages. You got it. Glad to do it. Jeff, can you tell users how they can submit enhancement requests? Great question. If you've got an enhancement request, a new feature you'd like to see added, feel free to open a Zendesk case. That's probably the best way to do it. Leslie and the support team will send that to me, and I'll add it to the stack. You can also email me directly if you like, and I'll add it to the stack. My email address was on that last page of this presentation. You know, submitting it in writing either via Zendesk or via email is definitely the way to go. And that goes both for enhancement requests and for reporting bugs. Although if my boss were on this call, he would fire me on the spot for saying bugs. We don't have bugs, we have issues, right? Okay, so here's another one. If you upload a file to a field in the web applications, does that make it where reviewers can see the document in Spectrum? The answer to that is most of the time, yes. If you upload a file to the field in the web applications, it makes it where the reviewers can see that document in Spectrum. The only exception to that rule is if the field is specified as not available to reviewers. There are a few fields. There's an option where you can make a field only applicable to applicants and not shown to reviewers. If you have sensitive information you don't want your reviewers to see, maybe you don't want them to see gender or ethnicity, that sort of thing, you may have had some of these fields hidden where you don't want them to see them. You can also do that on any field. So unless you've configured it to not show that field to a reviewer, then yes, the reviewers will definitely be able to see those attachments. All right, so I think that's all the questions that have come in through chat. Alex and Darius, I see your email address there. Thank you. I'll figure out, I'll get the answer to that question and email you guys directly the answer. Are there any other questions that didn't get posted?
Well, Jeff, this is Ann. If I could just make a few comments real quick to the user group.
Please do.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you everyone for joining. We have a nice sized group, and once again, thank you to Fusion Labs for hosting our semi-monthly user group meeting. And please be on the lookout for our next general user meeting, which will be in December. I also want to encourage people to go to the Blackbaud Fusion Labs user group on Wild Apricot and look at the topics that are on the forum. People are asking questions and interacting. And I also know that Fusion Labs has been doing a really good job of updating Zendesk and making it much more of a knowledge base. So if you have issues, or like Jeff said, if you have enhancement requests, please utilize that space. So other than that, that's all I have, Jeff.
Good deal. Well, if there are no more questions, let me put in one very quick plug. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do another webinar on GE NXT. We're excited to show you what we've been working on with GE NXT. It's a companion product to RE NXT and FE NXT. We'll be showing that off in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for an announcement from Zendesk about an upcoming webinar in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Hey,
All right,
Jeff,
sounds good.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for your time. Appreciate you joining us, and everyone have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.